You about those that are running for certain, for sure, March the 4th. And one of them is Paul Muite, who's a former member of parliament and who's been in the public eye for quite some time. Was revealed yesterday that he will be on the ballot paper alongside Dr. Shem Ochuodho, and they will be running on a Safina party ticket. Our question for you today, this morning on Sunrise Live is, would you vote for Paul Muite as president? Tell us why you would, if that's what you want to do. Tell us why not as well. Keep your comments coming in. Our SMS line 8040. You can tweet us as well at KTN Kenya. You can tweet me too at Yvonne Okwara, and we will be sharing your views as we carry on with our discussion this morning with Dr. Shem Ochuodho, who is Paul Muite's running mate, and he is with me now. Thank you so much for joining us. Karibu sana to Sunrise Live.
Thank you.
Right, so the first question then is, we've heard about all the other people who have expressed their interest to run until yesterday when we saw you presenting your papers at the IEBC. Tell us about the decision to run for, leadership of this country.
Thank you, Yvonne, the KTN and Standard Group for the opportunity for Safina Party to share its vision with Kenyans. I should mention from the onset that Safina Party is the oldest party, having been registered in '94, that's presenting a presidential candidate. That is something that's pretty telling, that there is a track record behind the leadership of Safina Party. Honorable Paul Muite is a pretty known name. Apart from being presidential candidate, he's a senior counsel. He's been pretty consistent from the very early days when he was a young TAC, when he deputized the late Jaramogi Odinga as deputy leader of then Ford Kenya Party. He's been pretty consistent, and when he did ask me to join him in this, I thought that this was the right thing to do. Kenya is at crossroads. I should mention that Safina Party perhaps was the first party also to present its manifesto, a manifesto that it did release in July 2011, which spells out what Safina government would do if and when the Kenyans give us the opportunity to rule this country.
And we'll get to that, particularly the manifestos, because that's what we are interested in. So we have a question that's coming in here on Twitter. It's, why Safina?
One thing that did prompt us to avail ourselves is that a lot of Kenyans who've been in this struggle for a while. I was a student leader in 1982, and I was incarcerated for about 10 months alongside a host of other student leaders. This is not a struggle that we started yesterday, and it's a struggle that's not ending tomorrow. I've made modest contributions to uplift the well-being of this country. I feel very proud that I brought internet into Kenya, adding me father of internet in Kenya. I feel very good when messages come in through Twitter, through Facebook, through M-Pesa. I feel I've made a little contribution to uplift the well-being of the Kenyan people, indeed the larger African people. But Kenya remains a sleeping giant. And this is why we thought we should offer ourselves. Kenya remains a sleeping giant because of leadership.
Okay, all right. The combination of yourself and former Member of Parliament Paul Muite, tell us about how that works, that working relationship, and perhaps to give us an insight as to how it would work if you would carry the day come March the 4th, the history of the relationship between the two of you.
The one thing I like about Honorable Paul Muite, he's not a tribalist. One of the greatest problems of the Kenyan society is ukabila. The chronic problem that we have, people are being bundled this or that. The one major thing I like, and one can't fault Muite about that, and I don't think anyone would fault me about that either, is ukabila. I stand for Kenya. That does not mean I don't belong to a tribe. I do, and that does not mean that I'm Kenyan first before being what I am next. I believe that we can be both at the same time. You can be Kenyan and be whatever you are. So that's one thing that gels between Paul Muite and I. We also believe in socio-economic justice. I belong to a group of Kenyans called the G47. And a number of people have been asking, where did the G47
That's
go?
Right.
Here it is. We've been working very closely with Safina, along a host of other political parties that believe in social justice. And we decided that if Kenya was driven well, there's no reason why Kenya cannot hit the roof. Part of my concern, Yvonne, is that go back 50 years ago, Kenya was at the same level with Singapore, Korea, and so on and so forth, at $500 per person. Today, 50 years later, we're only about $800, $900 per person, meaning we have only made marginal improvement. You very well know that 800 shillings now and 500 shillings then, you are perhaps richer than we are today. And this is why we are offering ourselves to give a difference in leadership. A lot of questions I know would be asked. Why are you coming in this late and so on and so forth?
That will be the next question, yes. Because we have a tweet here from Ashley Mutiso who says, do you expect a miracle when you have not done your part in campaigning? A lot of people saying, okay, you're coming a little late in the game. Do you think you're a little late to sell your policies to Kenyans, or do you believe there's enough time?
I must mention that Safina Party is pretty different. We'll recall the earlier days of Paul Muite and Honorable Dr. Richard Leakey being whipped and so on and so forth. That struggle still continues. We are different from the other parties. We believe in constitutionalism. Actually, people who have been campaigning before now were doing it illegally because the campaign period officially begins now. Very unfortunately, the people who are doing it, most of them in government, were using government resources to campaign. Yesterday, I saw a couple of candidates coming in to be cleared and flying the Kenyan flag. They were not coming as government officers. They were coming as leaders of political parties. But this is the problem. So Safina Party is a little different. We believe in constitutionalism and we want to go the way the Constitution, which we hold very dearly, to which we significantly contributed. We're very proud about Article 10 in particular, that talks of Kenya being one united, inclusive nation.
Despite the fact that, and we've talked about this, I think, on the show before, official campaign hasn't begun actually until next week. Right. But in terms of getting yourself out there and your messages known, back to my question, Shem, do you think there's enough time for you to sell your policy to all Kenyans in all parts of the country about Safina Party?
Yvonne, in politics, a day is a long time. We believe we have sufficient time. And we also believe that Kenyans will look at the track records that we've had and Safina has had. And we want Kenyans, we want to call this a people's campaign. We don't want it to be just done by Paul and Shem. We'd want this to be done by all Kenyans. We want this to be owned by Kenyans, because we're providing what others have called, and we would call as well, servant leadership. Because the kind of leadership that will make Kenya tick. And I would say this with a lot of pride. I've served President Paul Kagame for about 4.5 years. And what we want is servant, visionary, and selfless leadership. And this is what we're prepared to offer. Okay,
all right. As we carry on with our discussion, and we're getting to the manifesto and the policies and what it is that you hope to do for this country, but let's get some of these questions out of the way, like your past track record. We know you were a former Rangwe Member of Parliament in NDP. Worked closely with the Prime Minister at the time. How come you're still not with him now?
A good part of that history is captured in my book that Standard did serialize last year, at the Dawn of a Rainbow. It captures the formation, the conception of NARC, and so on, and the history, the efforts to get the opposition then together to get KANU out of power. And there were a lot of skeptics. People told us, no way, you can never get KANU out of power. But we were so committed and determined to get KANU out. We were strengthened and inspired by the work that done by the forefathers during independence time, when people were also told, how can Mwafrika get out of the Mzungu? But we did realize that as long as certain things were right, there was Mzungu eventually. People were being told, how can you use a rungu to get out somebody with a gun from power? That came to pass. In the same manner, we were so determined to get KANU out that it did happen. At that time, some people, my party chose to go and work with KANU. That was our parting ways.
Okay.
And I feel so good that I never worked with that party.
So for you, the moment at which NDP decided to merge with KANU, that was it for you?
That's right. Okay. I must say there's nothing personal between me and the Prime Minister.
All right.
Our difference was ideological.
Okay. Speaking of that, and because of that power that the Prime Minister wields in his strongholds, of course, he's a member of Parliament right here in Nairobi, but Nyanza is said to be ODM, NDP stronghold that follows Raila. Do you think you suffered politically after that because we didn't see you in Parliament later on?
One thing that in Safina, we don't believe in personalization of politics. And we don't believe it's right to balkanize Kenya. This is part of why we are held where we are. We're stuck where we are because of that old thinking that we must think of where we come from. And certain parts of the country must be segmented. That's wrong, because as long as Kenya and Kenyans continue to do that, this is what we are saying, that has to change. It may not be right. Often people say, but you know, we are a tribal nation. Allow me also to call it nation.
It's fine.
Yes,
can't help
but
where you come
as long as we continue doing that, Yvonne, Kenya is going to remain a sleeping
So
giant.
do you believe that's what it was, that it was personal, that because you chose to part ways with the Prime Minister at that time, that cost you your parliamentary seat?
I must mention, and this, I think, recent experiences would set me right. I didn't lose because my people rejected me, both in 2002 and 2007. Kenyans will recall, I had a nomination certificate in 2002, and it's very well captured in this book, and the same repeated in 2007. But it's not the people that rejected me, it's the headquarters that rejected me. And this is what we saw in the recent shambolic nominations in Nyanza.
All right, let's speak about those nominations. What seats are you in which seats are you planning to field certain candidates? Because while we saw the political primaries happening for all the other parties from NARC Kenya to Kenya National Congress, in however they chose to pick their candidates, we are not very clear on Safina's choice of leaders for various seats, and that is a question that's been asked by Omondi Kevin on Twitter. He says, how will Safina govern with no numbers? How many candidates do they have for the seats? Safina
is fielding candidates among all the entire hierarchy of seats. We apart from the presidential candidate, we have gubernatorial, we have senatorial, we have parliamentary candidates, as well as country representatives. I don't have the figures right with me, but we have quite a number spread across the country that are competing for power. And I must mention that a good number of diaspora candidates, I happen to represent the diaspora community in some respects, are running on Safina, just as I must mention that a number of officials of the G47 are running on Safina party, including our major two chairmen, Ken Wafula and Bidan Mbugwa. So they are both running on Safina, but there are others as well.
Okay, all right. So we will come back to the Twitter questions, and I can see you tweeting your questions, and we will definitely field them to Shem Ochuodho as we have him with us this morning, running for Deputy President on a Safina Party ticket. Let's get into the issues now. What are the key areas that Safina Party hopes to be able to address come March the 4th for Kenyans? What do you think are the key areas that you will be focusing on should you be able to run the government?
Safina's major focus is socio-economic justice. And even put simply, as just looking at the paper standard today, where, for instance, that Honorable Cecily Mbarire and Honorable Chavez are being given warning communications from the IEBC, the honorable body that's in charge of elections. And I ask myself, if you're a small guy, you're in trouble in Kenya. Because I asked, why didn't I see warning letters being given to the major parties? We saw the lady herself, Lady Madam Wambui, the kind of things that her party did to her. We saw the kind of mess that happened in Nyanza and other parts of the country. We didn't see any warning letters being issued, meaning we have two rules in Kenya. There are laws for those who can't, like Shem Ochuodho here, And they are the laws that apply for the big wigs. That's wrong, and that's the Kenya we would want to change. So social justice is a major area. We would want Kenyans to be all equal before the law. Secondly, this thing where Kenya has got one of the highest inequalities. You have the stinking rich, okay? The guys who dish 1,000 bob, 50,000 bob, without blinking an eye, and maybe millions without blinking an eye. And those who just struggle. 80% of Kenyans have less than 150 shillings a day. That's unacceptable.
All right, okay. How do you propose to be able to bridge this gap between the haves and the have-nots? That seems to be a debate that's shaping up even for the Nairobi gubernatorial seat. What are some of the measures that you would propose to put in place?
I think with good governance, it's possible to change the livelihoods of Kenyans. Most common, typical would be the case of food security. It's so unacceptable that in this age and era, Kenyans still die from hunger and from want and from famine. I mean, when we have such vast land that's arable, we're not doing any irrigation, we're not harvesting any rainwaters. This is unacceptable. That would be a major focus of Safina government. We do appreciate some work that the outgoing government has done, and I must mention as an alumni of former Mombasa Polytechnic, I'm very delighted that that's now Technical University of Mombasa, and with your permission, I'll talk about technology and innovation a little bit.
Yes.
I'm glad. I want to send my congratulations to that technical university because that's the right way to go. But I must mention that there are other things that previously the NAC government and now the ruling coalition has done that's right. One is opening up a little more the democratic space, the new constitution, the highways, the Thika highways, and so on and so forth. But I must mention that, looked at critically, a lot of these developments only help the middle class and the upper class. Think of Thika Highway, for example. The main beneficiaries are people who are able to transport their means, their wear along it. The ordinary Kenyan is not likely to benefit. So for Safina government, for every shilling that's spent on developing road infrastructure, will spend 2 shillings harvesting rain so that the rest of the country that's arable can have sufficient food, not only just for our domestic consumption, but also for export as well.
Okay, all right. So that's what we've talked about. You've talked about infrastructure benefiting everybody. Right. And we will get to the question of technology in a moment because we know that is your area of strongholds. But we have your tweets coming in and we will be able to show them on air in just a moment. But let's go into technology now. We all know this is your great forte. This is what you have studied for. This is your life and breath. Technology has come a long way in this country from, when we had landlines to now mobile phones penetrating just about every sector, to mobile money transfer, to social media now that is very vibrant. The Kenyan community on Twitter is, very outspoken and very vibrant. Tell us about what ways technology can now be used to continue to enhance our lives, and not just for those living in the big cities, but how we can use technology to better the lives of people across the country.
I must mention that I'm very delighted looking back. Internet came into Kenya on the night of December 20th, 1994. We're very delighted to have had internet coming in. At that time, it sounded rather remote. For some of us who had been using internet before in foreign lands, we appreciated the value of internet. But it took a little while for Kenyans to appreciate the value of internet. Today, do we ever imagine if you were to tell people, do away with your mobile phones? Would we imagine how life would be like without the mobiles, without the iPads, and this sort of thing? It would not be affordable. Without M-Pesa, for example, and even the other product, Tangaza, for example, which technologically is a little more superior. It works across networks. And we've barely scratched the surface. I must mention that I've had the privilege to do one technology project or another in over 40 African countries as part of my little contribution to promote technology in Africa. The future of this country and the future of Africa relies on innovation and technology. I've seen a number of people talk of digital generation and so on. I think there would be no denying that Safina brings through the true digital generation together with the real reformers, because, and this is the complementarity that you get between Honorable Paul Muite and I, with Muite as a senior counsel, the legal side. Law is a very noble profession, and we need justice. And of course, technology, which is the other side that I bring on board. So in terms of job creation, I am delighted that the Konza City has been launched. But I must say that very often it's said, you know, if you've only eaten your mother's food, you think she's the best cook in the world. I must mention that Kenya, we have raised the bar rather slow. We could be doing much better. I must mention again the case of Rwanda. Rwanda came from, we know the history of Rwanda. In just about 10 years, they're at par, perhaps overtaking us in technology.
Okay, Shem, when we speak about Konza City, yes, and it's in the papers today, there's someone saying perhaps the project is too ambitious. Is it?
I need to look at the details of the Konza City. One of my major concerns with the ICT in Kenya, and with due respect to the colleagues that are driving this sector, it has been that although we had a very good strategy, we have had a very good policy, we've not had a master plan for ICT. So a number of projects that are being implemented are ad hoc. And this is an issue I've raised in private capacity with the people concerned. Rwanda has a pretty comprehensive master plan for ICT for the next 20 years, the next 10 years, the next 5 years. And this is doable, and this is what other countries are doing. Kenya cannot live in isolation.
So do you think that's something you will be doing, creating a master plan
Absolutely.
for ICT?
Safina government will highly prioritize technology and innovation because this is the way of the future. This is where the jobs are going to be created. A lot of people are talking of creating jobs. In Safina's manifesto, we did talk of creating 700,000 jobs every year. A good portion of them are going to come out of this sector. We're not just going to create any jobs, but we will be creating jobs that earn value, jobs that are worth, you know, not just cleaning and that kind of...
Okay, all right. So professional work, 700,000 jobs, you said?
Yes, that's what...
In what sectors, and how do we propose to open up these sectors for them to be able to employ these 700,000 Kenyans?
A good number, obviously, one would be in the agricultural sector because that's the backbone of our economy. But a substantial number would also be in the services sector, and the services sector hereby includes the innovation and technology sector. But I must also say that there is one pillar for which Safina is well known, the diaspora sector, which is forgotten. You know, we are talking of 3 million Kenyans, and it's rather unfortunate. One of the things Safina is concerned about, and it's been in court for that reason, and it remains in court for that reason, is the disenfranchisement of 3 million Kenyans, the diaspora, as well as the disenfranchisement of 5 million young Kenyans who had waiting cards but were not allowed to register as voters. They were eligible voters. Okay? So the point is that the diaspora itself, and remitting into the economy about $1 billion every year, we believe this is happening despite of government, not because of government.
Okay.
With government support, there's no reason why this cannot double and treble.
Okay. So we've talked about the agricultural sector, we've talked about ICT that will be able to provide these jobs. Yes. However, we are talking about, we are an agricultural dependent economy, but there's also talk about moving towards industrialization. What do you think about that?
I think moving to industrialization is old thinking. Because we're moving into the information highway. I'm glad when I hear people talking about the knowledge economy, because that's the economy of the future. Singapore is a tiny island. It's much smaller. It's almost like our own Mombasa port. But Singapore today, while we only moved from $500 to $800, in that period, Malaysia moved from $500 to about $5,000 per person, per capita income. Singapore moved to about $32,000. You can imagine how many times they looped us. Not because of land. Of course, land is important, and agriculture is important, particularly for Kenya. But their main breakthrough was because of innovation and technology. So significant amounts of jobs can be created in that sector. Okay.
So now these are the policies that you intend to push to the Kenyan people to convince them to vote for you. But we have a question here from Derek Kamau on Twitter who says, we haven't seen pictures of rallies, perhaps. What is your method of taking this message out to the Kenyans between now and March the 4th?
Yes, I did mention at the start that Safina Party will be doing things a little differently like it has done in the past. Rallies, yes, are one of the major ways to put out information. But there are other ways as well, and of course we will be having rallies. We will be shortly sharing our schedule of rallies, which we presented to the IEBC yesterday. So we will be making it public. But in addition to that, Kenyans have become rather sophisticated. There are other ways to reach out to Kenyans. But also, in terms of different thinking, Safina will be introducing what it calls listening campaign. And again, this is one thing that I picked from Rwanda. The president has got one day in the year where he says every day politicians talk down to the people. But that particular day, the people talk back to their leaders. So that's like a listening campaign, trying to find out what is it that the people want. So I must mention that as part of our innovation, Safina will not be going the traditional ways of doing things. We will do some of that, but we will be looking at other ways as well.
Tell us about the listening parties, campaigns, and how you're going to, how that works.
In the case of Rwanda, the way it works, on that particular day, people know, and people come from all over the country, all over the republic, to the stadium, the main stadium in Kigali. And they start assembling there from as early as 4 a.m. The president, all government officials, the governors, the ministers, and everybody, the mayor, and everybody comes, even the local chiefs. And that day, people start queuing up, and they share their suggestions and their grievances. And I must mention that in the case of Rwanda, there are times that when people complain so much about certain leaders, they even get fired on the spot. So what happens, about 3 months to that date, the leaders make sure they're at peace with people. Because there are instances when somebody comes and says, this chief grabbed my chicken and did this or that. And when it's confirmed that that's true, action is taken on the spot. Now, that's important because we often assume that Kenyans don't know, that we leaders know. And this is not very right.
Okay. So this is what we will be having?
In addition,
yes,
of course.
Okay. But what's happening in Rwanda, the case you're giving us, is the president, now once he's in office, listening to the people.
Right.
But this is pre-election. So will we have you, say, somewhere in Kisumu County or somewhere in Tana River, sitting down and listening? Just tell us how it would work now in this case, because this is a little different. This is before the election. Actually,
already this is happening, even with a number of our candidates out there. If one goes to Kiambu, for example, you'll find where we're fielding a gubernatorial candidate. This is already happening. So I must mention some of this is already happening. But of course, we will also be doing the other things as well. But more importantly, the cyber world, which includes media, traditional media, including TV, including radio, and so on and so forth, including text messages, have become another platform to reach. You know, at a rally you could get maybe 10,000 people, 100,000 people, and so on. But when you're talking of media, you reach millions of people, not only Kenyans at home, but even Kenyans in the diaspora as well.
Okay, all right. It is indeed important. I like that you mentioned that Kenyans in the diaspora, but for this particular election, they will not be allowed to vote. Perhaps going forward, they will have that opportunity. When do we hope to see you hit the ground running? Dr. Ochuodho, if you can tell us when we will see a rally or a listening campaign, or where are we going to see both you and Paul Muite and say, okay, here they are selling us their policies.
Yvonne, with permission, could I say one thing about the diaspora you raised? Let's not underrate the diaspora influence, even though they may be not vote, and they're very bitter about that. By the way, the matter is still in court.
Yes.
They lost phase 1. They went to the Court of Appeal.
Right.
Even if they lose there, they're prepared to go to the Supreme Court. But they still have lots of influences. I must mention that I personally had to go to Kampala to register as a voter. And when I was in Kampala, I noticed that 90% of Kenyans were chased away. Although the IBC does say that it registered progressively diaspora, hardly 2,000 diaspora registered. Not that there aren't diaspora in the East African region, but a major problem I found was that the IBC was insisting on diaspora using passports. Now, when people go to Uganda or Tanzania or next door here, they don't carry passports. They have their IDs and travel permits or temporary passports. But people were being chased away. So it's really like IEBC was giving by one hand and taking away.
Okay, so now that you mentioned the great importance of the diaspora,
Right.
and this is not to say that they don't have a great influence, they are Kenyans and they're still out there and generating quite a bit to the economy.
Right.
Are you then saying you're going to try and focus on the diaspora to influence their relatives back home on how to vote?
Well, we will be requesting diaspora because one of our focus moving forward, because you know what we get from the diaspora. In the year 2010, we received $1.8 billion. That is higher than what we get from foreign aid. That was higher than what we got from foreign direct investment. So this is a major income source, and it's coming from our children, our spouses, our relatives. What we're saying that moving forward, among the pillars we have, agriculture, of course, is one. We've talked about the rainwater harvesting. The youth is another, because where Kenya excels is the human capital. Safina government will have a human capital development and exploitation plan. It's so amazing because you go to Nigeria, you go to South Africa, you go to Egypt. Probably those are the only African countries with comparable human capital. But you still find Kenyans doing very significant things there and beyond. But we've never realized that this is a major pillar we need to tap into.
Okay. Now that being said, and like I said again, we are not discrediting those in the diaspora, but the
Right.
people who will be casting their vote are the Kenyans who are living here.
Right.
So back to my initial question, can you give us a schedule? Can we know where the people are going to see Paul Muite and Shem Ochuodho listening or speaking to the people? Can you give us a schedule of your campaign strategy?
Our presidential candidate will be unveiling that schedule in due course. So I would rather, we already shared one with the Electoral Commission. So rather than take it from him, let me leave that to him. But we will be out there selling our policies, using all manner of means that are available. And of course, we want to make also an appeal to the diaspora and the youth, being some of the major groups we are focusing on. Not to forget about women, but they will remember Safina.
When we speak about women, how many female candidates do you have? Not just for the women's representative,
Right.
but how many women are we looking to field candidates in various capacities?
We have a number. Safina is one of the few parties where the number 2 is a woman. Okay? The deputy party leader is a woman.
Who's
So is Dina Awor, former president of Bunge la Mwananchi. So that just confirms that Safina espouses and recognizes the importance of women in line with our constitution.
Okay. Are there others who are running for member of parliament, county,
Yes.
governor, senator?
There are a number, and as I said, for example,
Can
my
you name
second
some?
and proposer, Margaret, is a candidate here in Nairobi. She was my seconder.
She's a
So,
candidate for what seat?
county representative.
Okay.
But there are a number of other candidates for parliamentary seats, which again, as I said, I don't have the details with me, but will be available. Actually, they are on the IEBC website for anybody who wants to see them. I believe there are about 60 parliamentary candidates, for example, running on Safina.
Do you believe you'll be able to marshal the numbers? Because that's also a very important factor. Getting the numbers in both houses of parliament. Will now have a bicameral parliament to be able to push this forward, because it's all well and good if you win the presidency, but if you don't have the numbers to push the laws through and to push policies through, that might be a bit of a challenge. Do you believe that Safina Party has fielded enough candidates to be able to carry the majority in parliament?
I think one thing that's clear is that no single party is going to have a controlling majority in the next parliament. That's clear. I mean,
that's probably why they were forming coalitions. But you chose not to. Why?
That's correct. We can have post-election coalitions. It's only that we didn't have pre-election coalition.
Why did you choose to not be a part of CORD, part of Jubilee, part of EGO, Amani?
We didn't want to go into a coalition for the sake of it. We did talk to some like-minded parties, and in the G47 there are actually a number of political parties, often we call them small, that are like-minded. But again, our track record has been that we don't go into alliances for convenience, because the ideologies that we stand for are not very similar to some of the other
But you would be
groups.
open to a post-election coalition?
Yes, we will be, of course, depending on a number of issues. One is that as long as we would be able to negotiate with the other groups that are ready to work with us, so that our irreducible minimums, our fundamentals, particularly the area of socio-economic justice, is one we cannot compromise on.
Okay. With the experience that Kenyans have had with a post-election coalition,
right,
it hasn't been some of the best experiences. For example, now we know about what's happening with the Deputy Inspector General. The Prime Minister says he was not consulted. Do you
right,
think Kenyans are ready for that again?
I must say that we must recognize that Safina has had MPs before. Actually, a number, about half a dozen MPs in this past outgoing parliament. So despite there being the possibility of being branded, we've had very good MPs. As a matter of fact, Mheshimiwa Abdikadir, for example, was a Safina MP, and we would all agree that he did a sterling job. So for us, it's not so much the numbers. I must mention from the earlier days, and having been in Parliament and voted as one of the most active MPs in terms of the questions and the motions raised in Parliament, I remember the days of the 6 or 7 bearded sisters. There were few, but we do know, Kenyans know, they transformed. In fact, I should mention that about 10 years ago, we had the group called Mageuzi, Muungano wa Mageuzi. What most Kenyans may not know, that NAK itself, before it became the party, NAK, NAK, it was National Alliance for Change. In Kiswahili, that's Muungano ya Mageuzi.
Thank you for staying with us. You are watching Sunrise Live. We are speaking with Dr. Shem Ochuodho, who is Paul Muite's running mate on a Safina party ticket. Together, they say they would like to transform the economy in terms of technology and innovation, and also taking a look at the agricultural sector and building that up for jobs. We continue fielding your questions now, and let's get right into it. Ntabo, on Twitter, you say, what vision does he and Muite have for Kenya? We've already answered that, but second part of Ntabo's question is, I think, what you need to answer. How different are you from other presidential aspirants? You take a look at the race and how that's going. How different are you? What do you bring to the table that's not
yes,
from the horses, as it were?
I think that's a very important question that's being asked. Very often, as a Kenyan, I've been watching our other candidates over the past months, maybe years. Sometimes it's the same message coming up over and again. I should say that I've personally been out of the Kenyan leadership for about 10 years. And we kept hoping that in that 10 years we'd see Kenya move to another domain. Unfortunately, this hasn't quite happened, despite the few things that we may see around having happened. So the one major difference is in terms of track record. I think Honorable Muite's track record, particularly, it cannot go without notice. Of course, if he had a chance, he's never had a chance to lead the country or play a major significant role. But I'm tempted to believe that, one, he's a pretty honest man. What he says is what he means. And I think that's a major difference that we bring to the table.
So difference is that track record?
Yes, track record.
In terms of policies,
honesty.
What would be different?
In terms of policy, in fact, although I talked of industrialization, one may misunderstood that I am trashing industrialization. No. No country can develop without industrialization. You need some aspect of industrialization. The three major sectors, agriculture, industry, and services sector, are all important. The point that Safina government is saying is that all this must be mechanized, and technology and innovation must be infused into them, so that even if it's agriculture, we'll not be exporting raw coffee or raw tea. It would have to be processed, so it's mechanized. If it's industries will use cutting-edge technology that brings down costs, but also increases efficiency and speed. So we do recognize that the three sectors are important, and we would be working towards developing them. But the cross-cutting issue is technology and innovation, that whatever you're doing must have modern technology to reduce costs. One of the other things I may add, where Safina government would focus on, is reducing expenditure on recurrent budget. Currently, almost 90% of an annual budget, which is about 1 trillion Kenya shillings, goes into salaries and recurrent budget. but that's the Safina government intends to reverse that. The target would be 60% to go on to development projects and only 40% to go on resources. And it's possible to get this done with proper leadership.
Kenyans, and we talk about this a lot, are used to leaders that they know, leaders that have been in the sphere, right. Maybe rightly so, maybe not so, depending on which angle you're looking at it from. Do you think that may be a disadvantage for you? We've seen opinion polls that have been conducted. Perhaps at the time it wasn't very clear right. Whether you were running. It is now. And it has been proven that Kenyans want the people they're familiar with. You've been out of the political sphere for the last 10 years. Right. Paul Muite as well. Do you think this may have an effect, a bearing on the public perception of your candidature?
Obviously, that's possible. They sometimes say out of sight, out of mind. But I think some of the work that we've been doing has been visible. Honorable Muite in the litigation, judicial sector, for him to have been a senior counsel, has been relatively visible. The work that we've been doing in neighboring countries, I think, has been visible to an extent. Some of the accolades, for example, in 2007, the Kenya community abroad gave me this Excellence Award for my contribution in uplifting technology in the region. And last year, the Commonwealth Telecom Organization did the same, identifying me as one of the African internauts or African internet pioneers. I mean, so it's visible. It may not be visible to the common man. But I am glad that when Kenyans use M-Pesa, they should think of Shem Ochuodho and Honorable Paul Muite and Safina. But perhaps if we had not brought internet the time we did, maybe today we wouldn't be having that. So that's a modest contribution we have made. But yes, I do agree that having been out of the scene, you're starting from a disadvantaged position. But I must say about opinion polls, they always say if the elections were held today, so the elections are not being held today, they are being held on 4th March.
But now on 4th March?
But also I should add that I personally have issues with those polls. I remember there was a poll purportedly taken for Diaspora where one could vote 100 times if you wished. It was not secure product. So there are a lot of things. I wouldn't go so much with polls, but yes, we would be upping our game. Okay.
Like you mentioned, a lot of what you've done is on an international scale, right. Being recognized in the African region, right. Outside the country as well. So how are you going to make that right. Relevant, one, two, known to the common man? Because you will be expecting votes from Kikuyu, you'll be expecting votes from Taita Taveta, you'll be Correct. Expecting votes from Garissa. Right. And some of these individuals aren't as aware of your track record on the international scale right. as they would like to be. Perhaps some of them might not even feel, okay, that's relevant. There's a lot of Kenyans, well, we talk about mobile phone penetration and M-Pesa, that's a good thing. Sure. But internet penetration is still something that is the preserve of the few. True. So when we're telling my grandmother or grandfather that, you know, internet is a good thing and this is what I brought and this is why you should vote for me, how do we make that relevant to that individual?
Thank you. Actually, that's part of why Safina government is requesting Kenyans, asking Kenyans to give them a chance, because it will emphasize more on that. It will take technology to the people. It will translate it into a manner that it makes sense. One of the things in my other professional world life I've been involved in is a project called M-Kura, Mobile Vote. We had a product as Diaspora. IBC said they couldn't register them because there was no time, there's no money. But we have an online site called KenyansAbroadVote.com. It's bank standard secure. People can go on there, and if they are verified to be eligible voters, they can vote. But in addition, we have a mobile solution where somebody could just sambaza a vote. Okay? Now, the point is that why do we put these Kenyans for 2 hours, 3 hours to wait for registration, to go to vote, and so on and so forth? One could, from the comfort of his home or her home, just sambaza a vote.
Shem.
Yes.
My question, how do we make all of this relevant to the lady in the village, because even when we take a look at the numbers of people on Twitter, for example, it's estimated it's about just 1 million people on Twitter. It's about 2 million people on Facebook, and this is against a population of 40 million. Now, I appreciate what you're saying with the people in the diaspora, but then again, back to my point, that the people in the diaspora will not have an opportunity to vote. The person voting is my mother, for example. How do we tell my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, your great aunt that this is technology? How do we make technology relevant to all Kenyans such that it uplifts their lives?
Yvonne, I remember being asked these similar questions about 20 years ago when we were trying to get internet in. But this was so remote. I mean, it didn't make much sense to a lot of Kenyans. But today, of course, mobile phones and so on make a lot of sense. Rather than live in the past, Safina would prefer to recognize the past, but more so live in the future. In terms of the effect, surely mobile, M-Pesa, today, even people in the local villages have access. In fact, if we talk of Tangaza, for example, whereas M-Pesa works for those with phones, Tangaza, and we normally say it works for the unbanked, Tangaza works for the unphoned. Even people without a phone can go to a Tangaza polling center, and there are already more than 2,000 agents in the country, in Kenya, that provides a Tangaza service. So even somebody, an old mama in the village without a phone, can go to a Tangaza site. They have what we call a PDA, personal digital assistant, which almost like the facilities we used for the BVR during the voter registration, biometric voter registration facility, which takes fingerprints. So one simply goes, that takes the fingerprint, and one is ready to go. You can send money, you can receive money. Now, if that doesn't touch the life of a person in the deep of Taveta or Moyale, then I'm not sure what would. But the point is, it would be incumbent upon Safina to bring the technology to the people, and we have the means and capacity to do that. And I must just add, with permission, that of course for all this to happen, education must be elevated. The Safina policy is to have free education, right from nursery to university, which is one different thing, because we recognize if we are talking of the knowledge economy, if we are talking of human capital, then education is paramount, and that's our Safina's policy.
Talking about that, then just give us the way forward now. I know you've mentioned that Paul Muite will be releasing your campaign schedule.
Correct.
But I do think Kenyans are yearning to see Safina Party presidential candidates and candidates for other seats as well going out there and saying, this is what we're doing. Just in closing, tell us about this message that you will be preaching to Kenyans. Tell us, where do we hope to see you in the 47 counties between now and then? And then also, even before you go into that, actually, we talked about funding all of these development projects, funding free primary education, before we come to the end of that. Because this is very important. We have promises from very many candidates. This is what we'll do, this is what we'll do. Where will the money come from for all of these lofty projects that you were talking about?
Good point that you're raising, because a lot of parties and candidates are talking of creating all manner of jobs for the young people and so on. That's where our future lies, the young people. But do not go a step further to explain how that would be done. I must mention that a major part is the resources, even the public revenue that's collected, more than 1 trillion. A good portion of it, as we've indicated, apart from pilferage, a good portion of it goes into recurrent budget. And we have said that that's one thing that we would want to turn around. If it's possible, we would expand the cake so that you do not need to send people off jobs. But if it becomes absolutely necessary, we would explain to Kenyans that some people have got to be retrenched so that we can have a lean, efficient government for their own benefit, so that we can have money saved so that they can be facilitated to go into business and have infrastructure developed. I must also mention it's very unfortunate that every Kenyan born today inherits about 50,000 shillings in terms of debt, public debt. A lot of this money was borrowed without the approval or consultation with Kenyans. We're not too sure it was used for the intended purposes. Safina government would look into all public resources like that. But more importantly, we would make sure that there is only prudent borrowing moving forward. To the extent possible, we'll use our own resources to the extent possible to finance our requirements.
finally, when do we hope to see you out there? How are you going to do that? Should the persons in all the 47 counties who are watching us today expect to see you and Paul Muite in their area?
Our hope is to go to all the 47 counties. Obviously, we are also alive to the limitations that exist to every candidate. But we would want to request Kenyans, call upon Kenyans to make this their campaign, so that we'd call upon volunteers. We already have some already doing this kind of job. Groups like Unga Revolution, for example. Our focus is Nja Revolution. You know, I talked earlier on about this. We would want to call upon Kenyans of goodwill, and Kenyans, particularly reform-inclined Kenyans, Kenyans who believe that transformation is possible, Kenyans who believe in this country, and that with good leadership, Kenya can move to the status of other countries, like we have seen, to come forward and help us in the campaign. But again, as I promised, in terms of our specific schedules, that's going to be released.
Very quickly, what happens if you do not win March the 4th? Do you see yourselves playing a role in the country after that?
I think our call up to other presidential candidates in particular is that they must start preparing their supporters for win as well as loss, because both are possible. Yes, Safina believes in non-violence. We believe in peaceful campaigns, and this is part of why we are so concerned that IBC didn't act on some of the scenes that we saw in recent times.
Okay. What role will you play if you do not win?
If we don't win, why don't we cross the bridge when we get there? But
do you have a concession speech? Because that's a lot of what we ask everybody. Do you have a concession speech? Do you even fathom the idea that it might not go your way?
Yes, that's possible. You know, for example, for those of us who have been in the cold, it's not the first time we will be in the cold. We'll continue with the life as it's been, but we will be glad that we have offered ourselves to Kenyans. If Kenyans choose not to vote for us, we won't blame them. They may know better why they wouldn't. But we are saying we are offering ourselves. We won't be blamed. I do know that about 40% or so of Kenyans are still undecided on who to vote for. What we are saying is that we are offering our candidatures out there. If Kenyans want to choose, fine. If they don't, we'll have done our bit.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Shem Ochuodho, who is Paul Muite's running mate on a Safina party ticket. They are gunning for the presidency of this country. They will officially be on that ballot paper. You've had the chance to be able to speak to him, to interrogate some of the issues that they have proposed. And he says that Paul Muite will be releasing that schedule so that you can have the chance to interact with them on a one-on-one in the various areas in which you reside. That